Election night in America.
3, 2. Tens of millions of people casting their votes during an unprecedented election.
I'm totally confused. Are we?
You're on camera.
Right. It's like a cold open.
It's a sweeping shot. You're like, it's almost like you're up to start the show.
Like I'm saying right now it's at 10 o'clock in
Right.
America, and then I turn to you, and then you say the next one.
Yeah, I just didn't know what the line was.
Yeah, no,
because I haven't
you can't
looked at this script yet.
Yeah. Okay. Ready? 3, 2. Right now at 10, it's election night in America.
Millions of Americans casting their vote in an unprecedented national election.
A global pandemic not keeping voters from the polls, voters waiting in long lines to make their voices heard. I wasn't fully looking at the camera for that last
neither
one.
was I.
Okay. So now what are we supposed to do, Val?
That's it. I mean, that's the top part.
From Fox 61 News, this is an Election 2020 special report.
All right, good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special Election 2020 coverage here on Fox 61. I'm Brent Harden. We are live right now on our digital platforms, including Facebook and YouTube and the Fox 61 News app. It'll have a little bit of a different rhythm, but it is in all respects live election coverage, and we're glad you could be with us on this historic election night. Now, polls closed minutes ago here in Connecticut and on much of the East Coast, and now we wait. And of course, it could be a long wait. You know this, with all of the people who have cast absentee ballots, many of them having come in over the course of the last week, 70+ million across the nation, more than 600,000 here in Connecticut. Those all have to be counted after the polls close in each of the respective states. That means here, those absentee ballots, more than 600,000 of them are just now beginning to be counted. So it could be a long race, and it could be a long night waiting for the results to come in. Now, we take a look at the race for president at first. It'll be some time before we have the clear numbers, as we just said. But having said that, there are some numbers in. There are even some states called at this point. You can see the total right now. Let's go over to Aisha Bowe at our touchscreen and talk about what's happened just in the few minutes. Aisha, you had several states come in a matter of a minute right before we went on air.
Yeah, a lot of states being called right now by the Associated Press. I'm working to get them on the map here, but just going to read some of them off my phone here. First and foremost, it looks like Vice President Joe Biden will take Connecticut. The Associated Press is reporting that right now. I'm going to switch this view to TweetDeck because I am using the Associated Press's politics view here. We can call right now. President Donald Trump wins Mississippi. President Donald Trump takes Alabama. Joe Biden takes Connecticut. As I mentioned, Joe Biden will also take Delaware. Joe Biden will take Illinois. President Donald Trump will take Tennessee. And then Joe Biden will also win Maryland. Joe Biden is also being called to win Massachusetts as well as New Jersey. President Donald Trump right now, Associated Press is calling that he will take Oklahoma. So a lot of these results are coming in. Again, I'm working to get this map updated here for you as we get these live election results that are coming in throughout the day here. So a lot of these states are coming in at this hour. And of course, we'll continue to update you as soon as we get more results. But the breaking news here, of course, here in Connecticut, our polls closed at 8 o'clock. And right now, the Associated Press is saying that former VP Joe Biden will take Connecticut. Brent, back to you.
Aisha, thank you, and we'll visit with you throughout the next 2 hours as those states continue to come in. But as we said, it'll be a long night, likely days, maybe weeks before the presidential race is called. All of those absentee ballots we talked about have to be counted. And in some states, as long as they're postmarked by poll close tonight, by November 3rd, they can come in 3, and I think in Pennsylvania even 6 days late, and they will still be counted. So depending on how the math works out and depending on how tight the race is, it could be days before it's called. So let's focus here in Connecticut right now on the local races that are up for grabs in the State House and the State Senate. There are lots of those, and on top of that, all 5 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives here in Connecticut are up for grabs this election day. So let's take a look at the slates here. I don't think we have any numbers on these, but just to remind you what the races are. This is the 1st Congressional District. Democratic incumbent John Larson taking on Republican challenger Mary Fay and the Green Party candidate Thomas McCormick. Then we move to the 2nd District, where Democrat incumbent Joe Courtney is taking on 3 opponents there: Republican Justin Anderson, Libertarian candidate Daniel Real, and Green Party candidate Cassandra Martineau. One of the hottest races here in Connecticut in the 3rd Congressional District, that's Democrat incumbent Rosa DeLauro and Republican Margaret Streicker. They've been going back and forth a little bit this election season. The gloves came off there. We'll see how that one shakes out tonight. The Green Party candidate in that particular race, Justin Paglino, also in the mix in that race. And in the 4th Congressional District, Democratic incumbent Jim Himes being challenged by Republican candidate Jonathan Riddle and Independent candidate Brian Merlin. And then finally, the 5th Congressional District, where Democratic incumbent Jahana Hayes, ending her first term and seeking re-election for the first time, is being challenged by Republican candidate David Sullivan and Independent candidate Bruce Walczak. Well, this election has certainly been much different than any we've ever experienced before, and why not? It is 2020. One of the key components of it, of that this time, long lines at the polling places. People up and at them early this morning. Take a look here, waiting in line to cast their ballots. The voters decked out in their warm weather gear because it was chilly, and their masks. A big reason for those long lines, in fact, the social distancing during the pandemic, people keeping their distance, staying as safe as they can during this COVID-19 pandemic. Here's what it looked like just a little while ago in Hartford at the polling location at the Grace Lutheran Church. Long lines there as Hartford residents waited to cast their ballots. So check out this time-lapse video taken early this morning at one polling location. The long line winding all around Harborside Middle School in Wallingford. This was taken a little after 6:30 in the morning. A big showing there. In most cases, those lines moved along relatively well as voters got in and out after casting their ballots. And of course, as we just mentioned, people are standing farther apart, so the lines might look a little bit longer than they might normally look and move a little faster than they might normally move. So for those people at their polling location waiting in line, if you got there before 8 o'clock tonight, you're still going to be allowed to vote. In fact, if you got in line by 8 o'clock and you still need to register, you can register and then you will be allowed to vote. If you got there after 8 o'clock, you are unfortunately out of luck for this election. There's always 2022 and 2024. All right, so let's check in at one of the polling locations where we've been seeing those long lines. Fox 61's Dave Puglisi has been down in Bridgeport tonight, and we want to bring him in now. Dave, what's the latest there? Are there people still in line? That's the most important question.
Well, Brent, actually, that is the end of the line right there. Just the last couple of people here who originally were wrapped around the building right around 8 o'clock when polls closed. But in those last 10 or 15 minutes or so, every single person who was in line has got the opportunity to go into that building, to cast their vote, and have their opinion heard. And that was something that's been going on all day here. At last count, over 2,100 people were able to come to this location to vote today in Bridgeport. Now, Blackham Middle School here in Bridgeport only had one minor glitch, and that was with a tabulator this morning, but the machine was quickly fixed itself. Part of why things ran so smoothly around the city was from the help of Max Medina. Medina was appointed by the Secretary of State's office to monitor polling in Bridgeport. The state felt that there was a need for one after having issues in the past with elections. They either haven't run smoothly or some have challenged the validity of the results. He says people in Bridgeport can rest assured knowing that their votes will be accounted for no matter how long you may have to wait in line.
People have been really gracious about the wait. The line is long, but it is moving.
And of all those people waiting sometimes for a fair amount of time, I've only seen 3 people who were unpleasant or in any way disrespectful. Everybody else has come out to do their duty in good spirits, and it's been a very peaceful, wonderful day.
The city of Bridgeport has had well over 13,000 absentee ballots submitted, and they've begun starting to kind of count those, but Medina believes that it will take quite some time to get the results, and we probably won't have those until early tomorrow morning. As the latest in Bridgeport, Dave Puglisi, Fox 61 News.
All right, Dave, thanks very much. Of course, we've seen a lot of polls this election season, as we see every election season. They are the driving force behind the election, certainly for campaign chairmen and so on. So let's take a look here. Heading into Election Day, this was the most recent National Quinnipiac University poll in the race for president. These poll results were released just yesterday. Joe Biden in that poll holding a strong lead over President Donald Trump. According to that poll, you see about 50% of likely American voters surveyed sided with the former vice president. 39% of likely voters said they would be supporting President Trump in this election. And then last week, pollsters at Sacred Heart University's Institute for Public Policy surveyed the people of Connecticut heading into this election. The results were strongly again in favor of Joe Biden. Out of 1,000 residents surveyed, more than 51% of Connecticut residents indicated they plan to vote for Joe Biden. About 26% of Connecticut residents surveyed said they plan to vote for Donald Trump, and then another 20% reported last week that they were still undecided or unsure about who they would vote for in this election. So joining us right now to talk about the polls and how they are playing into the race for president is Professor Leslie DeNARDIS. Professor DeNARDIS is Executive Director for the Institute of Public Policy at Sacred Heart University, the poll we just quoted. So Professor, thanks so much for joining us tonight here on Fox 61. And I have to ask you first about the accuracy of the polls. And I hope these aren't fighting words for a pollster, but 4 years ago, the polls were notoriously misleading and inaccurate. What's been done in the meantime to make sure they're more accurate this time around?
Well, I think you voiced a very valid concern, and I think pollsters did learn a great deal after the 2016 outcome and realized that the results were at far variance from the predictions. And I think in terms of our poll, we have always exercised a great degree of quality control, and we do a scientific sample, a random sample of 1,000 Connecticut residents, and we do a dual methodology survey, which combines live telephone interviewing with digital. So we go to great lengths to make sure that there is a really scientifically valid survey and random sample.
And having said that, though, there is this, the term that came up in 2016, hidden voter. There's not really a way to account for that. People, especially in a state like Connecticut that is so blue, might not be very open about being a Trump supporter, and yet when they go into the polling booth, that's who they vote for. It's not really a way to account for them if they're out there, correct?
Well, I think as you saw in our results, we did find that there were about 20% undecided voters. And you might argue that perhaps within that 20% range were some voters that were just perhaps had been decided, but were not willing to share their decision with the interviewers. So I think that might capture, certainly a segment of those undecided voters. Mm-hmm. We've often heard that term applied with the so-called shy Trump voter, and perhaps a portion of that can be attributed to that phenomena. So I think you're right. It is hard to know with a great degree of certainty. We can only kind of surmise when people 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out from a very highly publicized election, when they're still reporting that they're undecided, we have to say, well, we have to kind of dig a little deeper and say, maybe perhaps they're not willing to share.
Okay, so hidden Trump voters aside, that 20% still undecided figure kind of stuck out for me. Now, Connecticut does have a large number of unaffiliated voters. We'll say that at the beginning. But were you surprised to see a number that large saying a week before the election they had still not decided who to vote for?
I was. It did stand out to me. And I think, in this highly polarized year, I think there might be a sensitivity, there's a certain volatility, and a certain level of acrimony in this election cycle that we haven't seen previously. And I think that might have driven people's reluctance to share for whatever concerns they may have had with not wanting to really be forthcoming about that. But yes, it did certainly stand out to me. Yes, we do have quite a large segment of unaffiliated voters in Connecticut. I think it's the second largest segment of the electorate, I think, after those registered as Democrats. So they are potentially a group that can swing an election one way or the other. Perhaps, but in this case, I think most of them probably broke in favor of Biden.
So let me ask you this question, because those of us out here who just looking at the poll results that you folks publish, we see a certain number associated with Trump, a number associated with Biden, and so on. But we don't analyze the way you do. Give me some analysis here. What sticks out for you? What strikes you that maybe some other people might not notice in the numbers?
Well, I think if you drill down on certain some of the counties, if you drill down on probably you can look at income levels. Income levels sometimes are highly correlated with support for one or the other. I think higher income levels were more associated with Biden supporters. I think lower income levels supporting Trump at greater length. So, yeah, there's a variety of ways that you can drill down on the data.
All right, Professor Leslie DeNARDIS of Sacred Heart University, a pollster there. Thank you for spending a few minutes, and good luck when you go back to evaluate your polls after this is all over. I hope you guys wind up finding out you did well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right, we have some breaking news right now, and this is actually in the state's COVID-19 fight. The state reaching a 4.6 positivity rate now, according to the newest statistics that just came out from Governor Lamont. An additional 985 people have tested positive for COVID-19. Right now, 381 patients are hospitalized. Currently, that's an increase of 41 since yesterday. Pretty big jump. Unfortunately, 7 more people have died with COVID-19 complications. 21,000 people have been tested in the state since yesterday. Also, 2 more states have been added to our state's travel advisory, those being Oregon and Washington. Added to the impacted locations list. If you're entering Connecticut from these locations, you need to quarantine for 14 days or show proof of a negative COVID test within 3 days of traveling. Anyone traveling from an affected state to Connecticut must fill out a travel health form. Massachusetts also on that travel advisory list, by the way. Those who travel to and from Connecticut for work can still do so as long as they are in the state for less than 24 hours. We have the full list of states at fox61.com. All right, so this election season, Fox 61 has teamed up with Quinnipiac University for a very unique partnership with the younger generation of voters. And our Ben Goldman has been discussing this election and the topics and the issues at hand with the political science class at QU. And he joins us now to continue that conversation. Ben?
Yeah, Brent, Generation Z voters, a certain segment of this population that we want to hear from. And we've been sitting into Quinnipiac's political science class, who are specifically talking about election 2020 and what a time to do it. Want to introduce some of these students. We have Summer, Sam, Miriam, Nick, and Ryan. Sam, I want to start with you. What is this class all about? You've been sitting in this class studying this election. What are some of the projects that you've been doing, if you could just unmute yourself?
Just making sure I heard you. Did you just ask what this class is all about? Because you're like a little off with the volume.
What this specific political science class is about and what you guys are studying.
Okay, so basically this political science class is mainly about the election and leading up to the election. We talked about not just the 2020 election, but elections in general and different trends that we've seen in elections throughout history. So what's changing, what's adapting, what's different about 2020 than any other election we've ever seen before. So we're pretty much just analyzing what election years are like and how 2020 has, as everybody knows, it's been a different election year than we've ever seen.
You know, one of the topics that is so interesting about this class is that you guys are taking part in your first presidential election. Nick, what are you hearing from some of your peers about some of the topics that are bringing them to the polls and making them enthusiastic to vote for the first time?
Yeah, a lot of the people that I'm talking to are primarily 20, 21. A lot of these folks did not vote in 2018, although they were able to. So definitely the fact that it is a presidential election definitely excites a lot of younger voters and like kind of engaging in the political process.
All right, Summer, what do you think is going to happen? Are there going to be more young voters coming out and moving the dial forward in this election? Do you think older voters over the age of 65 are going to be the ones coming out? Do you think young voters are really going to make that much of a difference, Generation Z?
So I think our generation has the passion and the drive to definitely swing an entire election. But I definitely think that our generation has the enthusiasm a little more than, say, our generation in 2016. And I think we're going to be surprised. I think that the turnout may be higher than it was in 2016 for our generation. I think we may outshine senior citizens in this country, but it's all up to what we'll see tonight.
Miriam, I want to bring you in. One of the projects in this class, which was so interesting, you guys did presentations last week that I saw a little bit of, was you had to create a campaign strategy for the last 72 hours for either President Trump or President Biden. From what you've seen over the last 24, 48 hours with these two candidates, how have they been doing? What are they missing out on as far as reaching Generation Z voters?
So they're definitely, I've seen, so we did the President Trump campaign and we focused on the economy, so he's definitely hitting those points exactly how we want him to. I think they're definitely missing out by reaching out to these like college campuses more closely. I think we're still not fully focusing on these students and finding a way to get them out to vote. I think that these presidential candidates need to, I don't know, they're not expecting much of us because it's fair. They usually don't. Our age group doesn't come out and vote. So I just hope that within the next few hours and everything going on that they do focus more along those lines.
I'm being told to wrap, but just in 30 seconds, Ryan, I got everybody in except for you. Your message to other young voters out there who maybe didn't partake this year, what's your message? Why take part?
You have to exercise your right to vote. We're very lucky in this country to have that opportunity, and you know, with everybody's strong feeling for 2016, you just have to take your opportunity.
Summer, Sam, Miriam, Ryan, Nick, thank you guys so much. It's been fun taking part in your class. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much, guys. Stick around. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ben, thanks so much. I want to prepare you. If you're watching us on Facebook or one of the other social media pages, be aware just in a couple of seconds here, we're going to cut away and we're going to go to a 4-minute cut-in on television. Matter of fact, we're going to do that right now.
From Fox 61 News, this is an Election 2020 special report.
All right, thanks for being with us on Election Night 2020. I'm Brent Harden. A very busy night at the polling places across Connecticut. The theme in most cities and towns, long lines at the polls. Take a look here at what it looked like in Hartford at the polling location at the Grace Lutheran Church. Long lines there as Hartford residents wait to cast their ballots. A big reason for those long lines, of course, social distancing during the pandemic. People keeping their distance and staying as safe as they can stay during this COVID pandemic. And now it is all about tallying up those votes. Fox 61's ZINNIA Maldonado joins us now live in Hartford with the long process ahead for election officials. ZINNIA.
Well, Brent, as we heard from the Secretary of State, Denise Merrill, the state saw nearly 70% of registered voters turned out to vote. Out of that percentage, though, nearly 600,000 chose to turn in absentee ballots. And now poll workers across the state and right here at Hartford City Hall have to count up those ballots. Now, we spoke to some poll workers here. They say they have already run more than 10,000 ballots. They have about 11,000 in total so far. They explained counting all those ballots does take quite some time. They have to undo the envelope, write down the person's name, then separate the ballot so it remains anonymous, and then put that in the tabulator. So that 10,000 number could go up as poll workers are out collecting those last-minute ballots that were deposited before 8 p.m. right now, and they will bring them back here to Hartford City Hall to finish out that count into the night. But for now, we're live at Hartford City Hall. ZINNIA Maldonado, Fox 61 News.
Brent, that's right. We are getting some results so far. So far tonight, about 17 states have been called so far. A lot of states on the East Coast right now being called, including Connecticut. That we did learn earlier that breaking news, Joe Biden will take Connecticut right now. Now, over on the board right now, we are watching various races throughout the country, whether it's the presidential race as well as the U.S. Senate race as well. Right now, President Donald Trump is leading based on the projections we've gotten so far with 50%, with former VP Joe Biden leading with 49% here. We can come back to me on air right there with the U.S. Senate race. A lot of movement happening there as some of those polls are starting to close. We are watching these races very quickly, very closely rather. Republicans are leading in the U.S. Senate right now with 53 seats. Democrats will need 3 to make changes there. So some of those races are coming in right now. I want to click some of them right now. Delaware, 31% of those votes have been counted so far. And then on the other side, we know that Georgia, about 7% of those races have been counted so far. But again, we are watching this U.S. presidential map very, very closely. Now, some key battleground states to watch tonight that we're still waiting for those results to come in, including in Florida, where right now, let's see if we can get that click there. There we go. Some results coming in Florida right now. About 80% have been counted there. And then, of course, we are watching some of those other battleground states with Georgia as well. But for now, I'm going to send it back to you, Brent.
Okay, you can always get the latest information on this election on fox61.com and the Fox 61 News app. Stay with us, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube and the Fox 61 News app right now for continuing election coverage right here at home. And you can expect more tonight on the Fox 61 News 10 and 11. Back now here on Facebook and YouTube and the Fox 61 app. We have Rob Kane joining us right now here on Fox 61. Rob is a former state senator, currently serving as a Republican auditor for the state. And Rob, thanks for joining us. Thanks for staying with us. I know you were with Jen and Ben for a couple of hours, and thanks for sticking around here. And I want to ask you right now, a lot of Democrats, especially here in Connecticut, will say this entire election is a referendum on the first Trump term. What do you say to that?
Hey, Brent. Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate this. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know if it's a referendum on President Trump's tenure. I think it is a referendum on what's taking place across our country. The country is seriously divided, and I see that tone on both sides of the aisle. Here in Connecticut, we've had a great history of working well together and working in a bipartisan manner. That's why I wore purple tonight, because I thought we'd be working bipartisanly, you know. But we'll see what happens. Voter turnout, usually when it's this high, is to get the incumbent out. That's never a good sign for the incumbent when voter turnout is up. But I think this year may be different. I think people are excited about what President Trump has done prior to the pandemic. Record low unemployment, record high stock market. I think our 401ks are going through the roof right now, or have been. So, you know, aside from the rhetoric, aside from the tone, I think overall people are motivated on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, certainly on the Republican side, you would like to have people focus on the economy and the strides in the economy rather than the pandemic itself. And of course, the Democrats are wanting to basically blame the pandemic and the damage it's done on President Trump and his response. Again, what do you say to that?
Well, that's a great question. I think you heard that in the final debate. President Trump said we have to learn how to live with this pandemic. Vice President Biden said we are dying from the pandemic. So it's two different views. I think most people want to take the positive view. They want to find that silver lining. No doubt people are suffering. It's been an awful, awful time during the COVID pandemic. But at the same time, we're looking for hope. We're looking for someone who's going to lead us out of this. We're looking for positivity. And I think that's the difference that you heard on that debate. And I think that's the difference in the two philosophies.
Let me ask you about local politics here. We know that our Democratic House Speaker, Joe Arasimowicz, House Minority Leader Themis Claridis, Senate Minority Leader Lynn Fasano, all three have said they're not going to run. They're going away. There will be new names in place there. What will that mean for the state legislature moving forward? What kind of changes do you think we might see?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's a great loss. Those are three great people who I've worked with over the years, and bipartisanly again. But you always find people that step up, right? I mean, the legislature was around before we came in, and they'll be around long after we're gone. So I think Connecticut is different than the national scene. We work together. We get along with one another. And I think we work in a friendly manner. So I think you'll find good leadership. Matt Ritter, state representative, will be a good speaker on the Democrat side. You've got Vin Candelora, who will step up possibly to be the leader in the House for the Republicans. And it's yet to be determined about the Senate, but I think you've got a very good choices no matter who the caucus goes with.
All right. Dan Kane, thank you. Hope you'll stick around. We can talk with you a little bit later on. Right now, I want to bring in the Connecticut State Treasurer, Shawn Wooden, also joining us tonight. Rob Kane came in with the Republican perspective. Shawn Wooden can bring us the Democratic perspective. And Shawn, thank you for joining us. And I want to ask you, because I know you talked last hour, as a matter of fact, about the blue wave you expect, and I want to ask you if you could get more specific. What specific benefits does a Joe Biden presidency mean for Connecticut specifically?
Right now, we in Connecticut in government, we are fighting, arguing with the federal government to pass a significant stimulus package, and they have failed to do so in terms of this next round. So that is one thing that we can expect with the Biden presidency, and that the package is expected to be much larger, much more robust. And one of the biggest debates in Washington is whether or not there will be support for states and municipalities. And the Democratic version of a stimulus package includes that support, which is desperately needed. So that's one big difference that will help Connecticut. PPP, small business loans, a host of other investments in our state and in the rest of the country. We need a growing economy. And economists from Goldman Sachs, from UBS, and others have analyzed this and have said that a Biden presidency is likely to grow the stock market because of, one, fiscal stimulus, which is not being provided at this point. In addition to that, reducing trade tensions. So there are a number of benefits that Connecticut will inure to. Our residents benefit in doing that.
And how about looking a little bit longer down the road, though? Defense industry, very important here in Connecticut. Does a Biden administration support the defense industry in the same way or better than the Trump administration would?
Of course, support for the defense industry is bipartisan. We hear a lot about bipartisan, but that is one thing we see, and we have a great Congressman Joe Courtney fighting for us in our Connecticut defense industry, Congressman John Larson, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, that level of support, because it is in our national interest to have a strong defense industry and sector in Connecticut. And so I don't think there will be much of a difference there.
All right, Connecticut State Treasurer Shawn Wooden, thank you. And again, stick around. We'll talk to you again later on. I would like to bring up J. Stan McCauley right now, if we could. We have him, okay, on camera 5. J. Stan McCauley, there we are. Former candidate for Hartford mayor, local businessman in and around the capital city. Appreciate you joining us tonight. And I want to see if I have this right. You ran for mayor. You were a registered Democrat. You ran as an independent. You were endorsed by the Republican Party. Do I have that right?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm not sure what that makes you other than unique, but we certainly appreciate your perspective here tonight. And let me ask you. I want to ask you about the state legislature. We talked about this a moment ago with Dan KANE, but we have the House Minority Leader, we have the Speaker, and we have the Senate Minority Leader, all three leaving. New people will be taking their place. What do you think that means for the Connecticut State Legislature?
Well, I think it gives fresh opportunity for some new perspectives. Probably, Matt Ritter might wind up being in a key leadership position, perhaps Speaker. But hopefully what I see is, just another opportunity for people to work together, try to build consensus, and, just move the state forward in light of where we are as a region, as a state, and as a nation.
Do you think the rhetoric at the federal level between President Trump and his challengers there is even divisive within the Republican Party, but do you think that rhetoric at the federal level makes it more difficult for legislators here to work with each other in a bipartisan way here in the state of Connecticut?
I think it makes it harder for legislators to work together because of how polarizing Donald Trump is with his personality, because so many, his wings cover so many people. It's more like the party of Trump than it is the Republican Party at this point. But Republicans are still, for all intents and purposes, under his auspices. So I think there's a natural tendency to put onto any Republican the Donald Trump effect, if you will, and it can be quite divisive and quite make it very difficult for people to work together, which is something that the constituents deserve.
Let me ask you about your city. You ran for mayor of Hartford. You're joining us from Hartford now. What does the city of Hartford need over the course of the next 4 years?
Well, you know, the city needs a lot of things. I think that, you know, the greatest thing that the city of Hartford needs, in my never-to-be-humble opinion, is economic development. There needs to be a way to create economic vitality among the people within the city. I mean, Hartford's the fourth poorest city of its size. It's a very, very poor city. It's a city in the grips of poverty. It's very well camouflaged. It's never talked about, but poverty is the reason that the city is in the grip of the crime wave that it is in. I know there are some that like to blame it on COVID-19 and everything else under the sun, but at the heart of the issue is that it's a poor city in challenging times. So, you know, people turn to an underground economy, which can be very volatile and very violent.
All right, J. Stan McCauley, thanks so much for joining us right now. We appreciate your expertise tonight. We'll get back with you. Okay, are we moving on to 3rd District now? Okay, this is the 3rd Congressional District where incumbent Democrat Rosa DeLauro is facing off against Margaret Streicker and Justin Paglino, and the campaigning between Rosa DeLauro and Margaret Streicker specifically has been kind of gloves off. It's been a little bit, it's been a contact sport here. Fox 61's Tony Terzi is live now, and following that race, he joins us with the latest on this. Tony?
Hey, Brent. Good evening, everyone. We're live here at the Schubert Theater in the foyer, where we're awaiting the arrival of the 3rd Congressional District seat holder, Rosa DeLauro, who has held this office since 1990. In fact, the last Republican to hold the office, Larry DENARDIS, when he was elected back in 1980 for one term before giving way to Bruce Morrison, who then led up to Congresswoman DeLauro for the last 30 years. The Congresswoman voted via absentee ballot, but her primary challenger, a Republican, voted in person in her home city this morning. That's Margaret Streicker, the real estate owner in Milford, voted in her home city today. That's where she grew up. And DeLauro says people understand the significance of this election, and her experience in Washington means a lot.
I chair the Subcommittee of Appropriations in the House, which focuses on health, education, and jobs.
I see a lot of Democrats saying they've broken away from party lines to vote for me, and I still don't know if they'll be voting straight Republican or they'll be taking that up on the independent line. But either which way, I'm thrilled to have them join.
Streicker apparently struck a chord with quite a few police unions in the district. She earned the endorsement of New Haven Police Union and many surrounding communities, but DeLauro responds by saying many rank-and-file cops actually support her. Streicker's post-game, if you will be held, it's been going on for about an hour or so at the Great River Golf Club in Milford. Fox 61's Dave Puglisi will be there. We expect that Congresswoman DeLauro will be here live addressing the media sometime after 9 p.m. For now, live at the Schubert Theater, Tony Terzi, Fox 61 News.
All right, Tony, thank you. And we are also watching the race for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District, where incumbent Jahana Hayes, wrapping up her first term and running for re-election for the first time, is being challenged by David X. Sullivan and Bruce Walczak. Fox 61's Matt CARON joins us live in Cheshire now with a closer look at that matchup. Matt?
Yeah, Cheshire High School is where we're live. The lines here never really got too long. We did see people trickling in, especially once people got out of work. But what's trickling in right now is the vote count, and I want to show you where we are right now here in the race for the 5th Congressional District. This is 2% reporting. Now keep that in mind, not a lot of votes, but right now 53% of those votes are going to Jahana Hayes, 47% are going to the Republican challenger David Sullivan. Bruce Walczak, the independent, is getting 1%. I have to tell you, if those numbers hold the way that they are, that's a lot closer of a race than perhaps many people were expecting. Connecticut's 5th Congressional District is very diverse. There's 41 communities here in the area, and it hasn't gone Republican. You have to go all the way back to 2004. So the question is, could this be the year? Representative Jahana Hayes facing stiff competition from challenger David Sullivan. Sullivan is from New Fairfield. He's 61 years old, a former federal prosecutor and current professor at Western Connecticut State University and Yale Law School. He's gotten more than a dozen endorsements from police departments, and he's a self-proclaimed law and order candidate who supports police reform, gun rights, and immigration and healthcare reform. Meanwhile, Jahana Hayes, she's seeking her second term. She's 47 years old from Wolcott, a former National Teacher of the Year. Her husband is a Waterbury police officer. She sits on 3 congressional committees, including education, and supports gun control, Medicare for all, and the Green New Deal. A little while ago, I caught up with voters here in the 5th District, and I asked them what they want to see in their representative.
Somebody who kind of represents most of what the district is, not just one section of the district. So there's a good balance in the 5th District between rural and urban, so somebody needs to address both sides, I think.
Someone who will fight to continue to protect healthcare workers, patients in Connecticut, nursing home patients, hospital workers, those who are losing their insurance for one reason or another, people to protect the residents of the state of Connecticut.
All right, so that's the opinion of voters. And both of these candidates, by the way, have been well funded. Jahana Hayes raised $1.3 million. David Sullivan's raised $370,000 of his own. There were some commercials. There was a debate. So this is all going to come down to turnout and the will of the voters. And from all things that we're hearing, voter turnout here in the 5th District is expected to be at record levels. I've been calling registrars in different communities. They're all telling me, 80, 90%, the likes of which they've never seen before, even in a presidential year. And a lot of that has to do with people being able to vote prior to actually coming to the polls with those absentee ballots. For now, we're live in Cheshire. Matt Caron, Fox 61 News.
All right, Matt, thanks very much. And as we continue to await the results from the vote today, we want to bring in Logan Dancey. Logan is an associate professor of government at Wesleyan University. Logan, thank you for joining us tonight to talk about what is a historic election. And I know one of your areas of study and research is the effect of partisanship on politics. And I wanted to ask you about this. People who are my age will tell you that this is the most partisan they have seen politics probably in their lifetime, and yet we're seeing record turnout at the polls when conventional wisdom says partisanship turns off voters. So square those for me. How did that happen? Why do we have record turnout?
I think people often say that they're turned off by partisanship, but that they are actually often pretty animated by the things that the parties are disagreeing over. And so I think when these contentious issues make it to the forefront of the agenda, when the stakes are really clear to people, they are more likely to participate. And I think we're seeing that in the amount of turnout that we saw in the 2018 midterms, as well as this election tonight.
Yeah, you go back a couple of elections, 2 or 3 presidential elections, and you would have heard a lot of people using the term gridlock, Washington gridlock, partisan gridlock, and yet this time around you didn't. So people being motivated by the issues themselves and probably personalities of the candidates as much, and they're not really complaining about gridlock anymore, at least not right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you will continue to hear complaints about gridlock, especially if we end up with a divided government again. And I think pretty shortly after the election, if the federal government doesn't take up some additional, coronavirus relief, then I would expect that you'll hear people talking again about gridlock. But right now, I think people are just so focused on the election.
So let's talk about the young vote. You are on a college campus, and you're talking to young people every day. Do you see more engagement in politics from young people this time around than you've seen before?
You know, I don't know to what extent we're going to see significantly higher turnout among young people as a electorate. It seems like we're seeing just higher turnout across the board. And so I would expect that young people are probably turning out at higher rates this election, but that most people are turning out at higher rates. I do think, you know, I saw a lot of students quite engaged this time around in the Democratic primary. I know that there was a lot of support among young people for Bernie Sanders in particular, and you saw a lot of the energy, at least I saw a lot of energy in the spring, although obviously things are different now and don't always see as many students face to face.
Is it possible, just from your perspective here, and not discounting the answer you just gave, but is it possible that if Joe Biden wins this election and 4 years from now you don't have a Donald Trump involved in it, that young voter engagement will subside just a little bit, maybe?
You know, I think it's always possible, and I think younger voters are, on average, less likely to turn out, and so, you know, we might expect that younger voters are particularly likely to see kind of changes in their levels of participation depending on any given election cycle, and I could certainly imagine if in the scenario you laid out of a Biden administration, if there are feelings that the Biden administration wasn't advancing some of the causes that younger people care about, then you might see less engagement than you're seeing this cycle.
All right, Professor Logan Dancey, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
All right, I want to check in again with Aisha Bowe for another race alert. Aisha, what do you have for us?
Brent, good evening. I want to begin with some of the local news here in our state, starting with the presidential election here in Connecticut. Earlier, as you see here on the board, Joe Biden is expected to win our state with 55% of the votes so far, with 11% counted. So he is projected to win here in Connecticut. I also want to give you a peek at what the local races are looking like. We are starting to see some of those results coming in. As you know, that Connecticut polls closed at 8 o'clock, and right now you are looking at the races for the congressional seats that are up for re-election, which is all 5 of them. The congressional district here, which is held by Joe Courtney, District 2. As you can see the reports right now, he is leading 53.2. And then want to switch over here to District 1, which is what we were just looking at with John Larson. He is also leading in that district. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro also leading in her area there as well. And then want to give you a look with Jim Himes there leading in his district. But take a look at this. Republican David Sullivan is leading right now in the 5th congressional district. So again, these are very, very early results that are coming in right now. But of course, we are keeping an eye on it. And then just to give you an overview right now of the national races, a lot of states are being projected right now, which as you can see on the map, a lot of variations here going on. We are keeping our eye on some of those battleground states, those key states, including Pennsylvania. Right now it is showing that VP Joe Biden is leading there. We also want to show you here Georgia. Looks like President Donald Trump is leading right now with 15% of the votes counted in that area. So a lot of movement here on the board. And of course, that will continue throughout the night as more votes come in. And of course, we'll continue to bring you the latest as soon as they are coming in, especially with some of those key states and our local races here in Connecticut. Brent, back to you.
Aisha, thanks very much. Okay, yeah, and right now you're looking at the latest numbers in the race for the Congressional District number 5. This is incumbent Jahana Hayes and her challenger, Republican David X. Sullivan. As you can see here, right now, as things stand, David Sullivan is ahead by some 5 percentage points. You'll have to help me out, Scott, up in the top corner. I cannot see how many precincts. 3%, so obviously very early in that race right now, but that's where things stand right at this moment. All right, so many topics at hand during this election, and in a year that's been overrun by a global pandemic, coronavirus certainly a front burner issue. So let's take a look now at some of the major issues the two presidential candidates are divided over that are shaping this election.
Who would have guessed, counting down the final seconds of 2019, that something else happening that very day would foreshadow the year and presidential election ahead? It was also December 31st when cases of pneumonia, an unknown virus detected in Wuhan, China, were first reported to the World Health Organization. By January 30th, the WHO declared coronavirus a public health emergency of international concern. President Donald Trump said this:
"Everything's really under control."
Fast forward 3 seasons, and one thing is clear. COVID-19 is a world public health battle and a political battle.
I'm fighting to eradicate the virus, rebuild the economy, and save our country from the radical left.
So many lives have been lost unnecessarily because this president cares more about the stock market than he does about, well-being of seniors.
According to Johns Hopkins University, there have been more than 8 million COVID-19 cases in the U.S. since the pandemic began. Leading experts project nearly 400,000 deaths by this February. By mid-October, about 11 million Americans were out of work. And though weekly jobless claims are down from their peak in late March, they're still about 4 times what they were pre-pandemic. President Trump, First Lady Melania, son Barron, and a number of White House Inner Circle staff tested positive for COVID-19 about a month before Election Day. The president's tweets continued from the hospital, and days later, campaign rallies, large, mostly maskless, resumed, despite the warnings of health officials.
If there's anything we should be doing, we should be doubling down in implementing the public health measures that we've been talking about for so long, which are keeping a distance, no crowds, wearing masks, washing hands.
I went through it. Now they say I'm immune. I feel so powerful.
Joe Biden's campaign has opted for smaller, socially distanced or virtual events.
It's become painfully clear as this careless, arrogant, reckless COVID response has caused one of the worst tragedies in American history.
Voters view coronavirus as differently as the candidates themselves. An October CNN poll found 66% of Biden supporters call coronavirus extremely important to their vote, more than 3 times the view of Trump supporters. There will be no coronavirus vaccine widely available in the U.S. by Election Day, meaning the winner of November's presidential election will still have to deal with a pandemic few could have imagined just 1 year ago.
The day Donald Trump took the oath of office to become the 45th president, he followed another common presidential tradition, a service at St. John's Episcopal Church. 3 years later, President Trump returned, walking across an area that was forcefully cleared of peaceful protesters. They were part of crowds who gathered nationwide day after day to protest the killing of George Floyd, a black man whose death by a white police officer kneeling on his neck was captured on video. St. John's was partially burned in one of those protests.
We have a great country.
The president vowed to return to law and order.
In recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others.
I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain.
Race in 2020 is a campaign issue fueled by the tragedies of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Jacob Blake, among others, all black citizens who died or were injured this year in incidents with white officers.
This presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist.
I will not sit here and be lectured by the vice president on what it means to enforce the laws of our country.
The issue of condemning white supremacists have also emerged.
Who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Days later, Trump said he does denounce white supremacy. Critics said it was too late. The pandemic may add another race dimension to the election. This study by APM Research Lab found Black, Latino, and Indigenous people are more than 3 times more likely to die of COVID-19 than white Americans when adjusted for age.
My opponent is offering Black Americans nothing but the same old, tired, empty slogans.
The Biden campaign has rolled out an ad from George Floyd's sister calling Democrats, quote, the change that we need.
Joe Biden reached out to the family to actually meet. He was there to listen. He was very sincere.
Whoever wins in November, an Inauguration Day walk to St. John's Episcopal Church will look different. This year, Washington's mayor renamed the area in front of the White House and St. John's Episcopal Church Black Lives Matter Plaza, a message impossible for a president to miss.
There are 1,383 days between Inauguration Day 2017
Do solemnly swear.
and Election Day 2020. And so many of those days have been focused on winning voters this time around. The first Democratic debate more than a year before Joe Biden accepted his party nomination. A series of President Donald Trump rallies promising to keep America great, held even during a pandemic. It is incalculable work by both parties for what came down to this number last election, 128,838,341. That's how many people voted for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Clinton won more of the popular vote. The difference? Trump won the Electoral College. Now the president is predicting a more ominous outcome.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen.
For months, the president has made baseless and mostly false statements about the integrity of the election, calling it rigged, questioning mail-in ballots, even suggesting North Carolina voters test the system by voting absentee and then in person, which would be voting twice, which is illegal.
Let them send it in and let them go vote. And if their system's as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote.
Joe Biden says this is wrong.
This is all about trying to dissuade people from voting because he's trying to scare people into thinking that it's not going to be legitimate. Show up and vote.
Millions are already early voting, standing in socially distanced lines, sometimes for hours. Ohio's Secretary of State says ballot requests are nearly double early October 2016 requests. Iowa's Secretary of State reports this year set a record for absentee ballot requests. And Georgia voters have sent more than twice the number of ballots compared to last election cycle. Early voting has also meant early hurdles. California's Secretary of State and Department of Justice are sending a cease and desist order to the California Republican Party to remove unofficial, unauthorized ballot boxes. A Texas court upheld Governor Greg Abbott's limits on one ballot drop box per county, even in sprawling Lone Star counties. Cities across the country are preparing in case of unrest at the polls.
We want to make sure that everybody's able to exercise their right to vote and that all votes are counted.
On top of this, the FBI warns voters that foreign actors and cyber criminals could spread disinformation about election results as the polls close. That's especially important as experts warn it's likely we will not know results election night. A CNN poll says 6 in 10 Americans say they are confident votes will be cast and counted accurately. Biden supporters increasingly confident of accuracy, Trump supporters less so, signaling yet another Election Day divide.
Thank you all. It was an election 20 years ago. Let's do it, guys. When a razor-thin presidential race turned into a monumental history-making case.
We'll hear argument now in number 00949, George W. Bush and Richard Cheney versus Albert Gore et al.
That was Chief Justice William Rehnquist on December 11, 2000, as the Supreme Court listened to arguments which led to the landmark ruling that stopped Florida's recount and gave George W. Bush the presidency.
So help me God.
It was hard to imagine such a remarkable Supreme Court and White House election storyline could ever happen again until the evening of September 18th.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court since 1993, died at the age of 87, just 46 days before the presidential election. National Public Radio reported Ginsburg told her granddaughter her most fervent wish was that she would not be replaced until a new president was installed. President Trump disagreed.
I think having a 4-4 situation is not a good situation if you get that.
What the president calls a 4-4 situation is a court without a ninth sitting justice, a court where decisions such as a contested election might end in a tie.
You are going to be fantastic.
It took just days for the president to nominate Amy Coney Barrett for the court. In her confirmation hearings, she did not commit to recusing herself from any case which may arise from the November elections.
I certainly hope that all members of the committee have more confidence in my integrity than to think that I would allow myself to be used as a pawn to decide this election for the American people.
There's another election reality in play, the Senate. Republicans control it 53-47. Waiting to confirm a court nominee until after November 3rd would have risked Democrats taking over the Senate, the White House, or both. Whatever happens in the election, President Trump's impact on the court could last for generations. Trump has nominated 3 justices to the Supreme Court: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. This likely moves the court to a 6-3 conservative split, more conservative than it has been in decades. It happens as the court is scheduled to hear cases such as the future of the Affordable Care Act, which provides insurance coverage for millions of Americans, among other things, a religious liberty case involving LGBTQ rights. On top of this, many wonder about the future of Roe versus Wade with these 9 justices. And that has led to election questions about the possibility of court packing, increasing the number of justices to tilt the equation if Joe Biden wins in November.
If elected, what I will do is I'll put together a national commission, and I will ask them to, over 180 days, come back to me with recommendations as to how to reform the court system.
In Amy Coney Barrett's hearings, she held up a blank notepad to demonstrate she was speaking without notes. It may prove a symbol of the weeks ahead with the court and the election, closely watched and impossible to read.
You don't have to read far into the Constitution to learn congressional math. Article 1, Section 2 says the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year. Article 1, Section 3 says the Senate shall be composed of 2 senators from each state. Simple, civilized, until politics shakes up the balance.
It's like a knife fight in an alley in every one of these places.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell firmed up the majority in the 2018 midterms when Republicans gained 2 Senate seats, giving them 53 compared to 47 for Democrats, including 2 independents. Vice President Mike Pence could be counted on to break any ties. This year, though, 23 Republican seats are up for election, almost double the number of Democratic seats. And there are some tight races for incumbent Republicans, including Arizona's Martha McSally, Colorado's Cory Gardner, South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, and Maine's Susan Collins. Democrats see potential to regain control of the chamber and the White House. It's an argument both sides are using with their supporters.
They're doing everything they can to take the Senate away, and that means the end of conservative judges. That means the end of all these good laws. That means tax increases. That means America will be less safe.
Democrats must take back the Senate. We will stay united.
Democrats would need to pick up 3 seats plus the White House, in which Kamala Harris would break 50-50 ties, or pick up 4 seats for a majority if President Trump wins a second term.
I just want to thank you and get out and vote. We're going to make this bigger than even 4 years ago.
That's where the focus may switch to the House of Representatives, where Democrats are expected to hold on to the control they picked up in 2018. Here's where their numbers matter. Imagine if neither Trump nor Biden gets an electoral college majority by the time a new Congress is sworn in. The House decides electoral college disputes by state congressional delegations. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's focused on making sure Democrats win more seats because a gain of 1 state would break a tie.
There ain't no light at the tunnel for you in the House of Representatives.
It's an unlikely scenario. The last one happened in 1824. But this election, no side is counting on certainty. The critical balance of power still too close to call.
From Fox 61 News, this is an Election 2020 special report.
So many issues to discuss and debate in this presidential election, and now it's up to the American people to decide. Right now, it's a little after 9 o'clock here on the East Coast, and the polls in many more states across the nation are now closed as we continue to wait for the numbers to be tallied. Let's take a look here now at the race for president. It will, of course, be some time before this particular contest is decided. It could be days, weeks, longer possibly. But here in Connecticut, Joe Biden has been declared the winner by the Associated Press. That's not a surprise. The numbers you see there, 55% for Biden, 44% for Donald Trump. And this is where the electoral vote tally stands right now. Guys, if we can bring this up. And this is a national number. Do we have that? I'm sorry, I got, okay, 119 for Biden and 92 for Trump are the numbers right now. Oh, I see there. I see. Okay, I see what you're doing. Let's get back into the discussion of some of those topics and issues that has America divided. And joining me right now to talk is Stephen Moore. He is an assistant professor of government at Wesleyan University. And Stephen, it's Dr. Moore, is it not? Are you a newly minted PhD?
I am.
All right. Well, congratulations. And thanks for joining us here. I know one of your areas of research and study is race and politics, and I'm sure you could talk about it for 2 hours, but I just want to ask you, just kind of in an open way, how does race factor into this election tonight?
It plays a pretty big role. Obviously, it's been a huge part of the national discussion over the past year, and especially the past 6 months or so, especially after the death of George Floyd. That said, it's the numbers on race and how they've impacted the vote total so far are actually pretty interesting. There's been a lot of discussion of Joe Biden's kind of underperformance in some very heavily Hispanic counties in South Florida. And that there have been some poll numbers that kind of shown that Biden had been doing a bit worse among Hispanic voters, but at least it seems early that the numbers are particularly low in South Florida. So it'll be very interesting to see if that continues to hold in some other states, especially given that Florida's population has a largely or has a large Cuban population, which has been friendlier to Republican candidates in the past than other groups that fall under the Hispanic umbrella.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Republican narrative to the black community has been the Democrats haven't done anything for you, and essentially saying, why not give us a try? And whether they are influenced by the Republican narrative or not, there have been some voices in the black community saying a similar thing. Why do we just give our loyalty to a Democratic Party that has had years and years and years and hasn't helped us? Respond to that. What do you think the black community is thinking right now about that particular narrative?
I think it's a complicated one. I mean, obviously, the Democratic Party has a long history of performing well with black voters, at least in the post-civil rights era. And again, there has been a lot of discussion of specifically kind of Donald Trump's attitudes on race. He's kind of tried to walk a fine line, especially in the debates, kind of talking about his steps with criminal justice reform, but also kind of emphasizing that he's the law and order candidate and the person who's kind of on the side of the police. So we'll kind of get to see how that's worked out. There have been a lot of discussion, I guess, earlier in the campaign about kind of the third-party candidates, especially someone like Kanye West. And I don't think that that's going to play or that he's going to play a big role in kind of spoiling the vote. But I do think black voters are kind of are especially cautious of their Republican Party given its history on racial issues. And Donald Trump has made some kind of very explicit outreach to black voters, but I don't expect it to be particularly successful, but we'll kind of see as the vote totals come in. In 2016, his campaign was mostly successful in getting black voters to just not show up for the Democratic candidate, and I think they've kind of tried a similar strategy this year. So it'll be very interesting to look at exactly what the turnout numbers look like. But I think if black voters kind of show up in large numbers, I would expect them to back Biden, especially given how well he did among that group in the primary, pretty heavily. But I think we might see some. I've seen evidence, at least, of gender splits within the black community, and basically kind of across the board. But that's a thing to kind of keep an eye out for in early returns.
Yeah. All right. Dr. Stephen Moore of Wesleyan University, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
All right. All night long, you've been weighing in on social media about what's important to you during this election. And Fox 61's Aisha Bowe is here now with some of your comments. Aisha.
Brent, good evening to you right now. I want to show our viewers one of our most popular posts that we've had so far today, which is this question that we posed to you all on Facebook asking, I voted because, and then filling the blank. So far tonight, we have had more than 400 comments just on this post here alone. And I want to share some of those comments that we are getting here tonight. If my camera person can zoom in, if you can, on some of these comments. We got one here from Zoe Mendoza, who says, I voted because my children's future depends on my vote. Want to get you another comment here from John, who says, because I love the freedom all veterans fought and died for. A couple more here. One from Emmanuel, who says, it's the right of every American. We should all vote no matter what. Now, in addition to some of the questions that we have been asking you all tonight, a lot of you have been sending us pictures as well. I want to share some of those with you here. This one I posted on my Twitter. A woman sent in a picture of her son Kyle and says this is Kyle's first time voting in an election. We want to thank you for sharing that. Kyle voted in Naugatuck today. I want to show you another one here. This one is from Crystal Lynn, who tweeted us using the hashtag Share61, saying that it was both of her son's first time voting in an election. They voted in Chaplin, Connecticut. Just one more here from Krista, who responded to our Fox 61's Ashley Afonso, saying that voting was quick and easy for her, and of course showing off her I voted sticker there. So a lot of you have been reacting to us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and we want to hear from you and continue to hear from you throughout the night. You can use the hashtag Share61 on those social media platforms. You can also email us like some of these folks did here, share61@fox61.com. But for now, back to you, Brent.
Aisha, thanks very much. Okay, very good friend and colleague of Fox 61 joining us now on this election night to talk about the races and the issues that American voters are paying attention to. Stan Simpson, host of the Stan Simpson Show, a former Hartford Courant columnist, all-around smart guy, long-term political observer here in Connecticut, joining us now. Stan, good to see you tonight.
How are you? The fighting pride of Oklahoma. How you doing?
All right, I'll take it. I claim Texas too. But anyway, now Connecticut. But let's move on. You were sharing with me just last night some statistical information within the black community relative to the election that I think might surprise some people. And let's just dive in right there. Talk to me about what you were telling me last night.
Well, I mean, I was telling you really that I consider Connecticut to be an anomaly. It's considered a very deep blue state. And so, my theory is Connecticut, the largest block of voters in this state is unaffiliated voters. 40% of the folks here in Connecticut, of the electorate, are unaffiliated. So my thinking was that Connecticut's role in this election, if things twisted here for Trump, that could be a telltale sign for the country, because it's such a very independent streak in the state, but it's considered a very deep blue state. So I thought the only role that Connecticut could play is that if you watched it and an inch closer to Trump, it could be a precursor to what happened across the country. As far as the black community, I think the issue of Black Lives Matter and of police reforms, I think there are blacks, white, Latinos who all are involved in this movement, and depending on where you are, if you're in Bloomfield or Windsor or West Hartford, that may resonate with you differently than if you're in Ellington or in East Haven or Torrington. So that's how I kind of saw this state, is that it's sort of considered very blue, but it's an independent streak that I find very fascinating.
I was just talking to Dr. Stephen Moore from Wesleyan University about race and the role it will likely play in this election tonight and for the next several days. And I want to ask you one of the questions that I asked him, and that is, are people within the black community, and I think we're hearing some voices, I guess I should ask how widespread you think this might be, who are looking at the Democrats and kind of looking hard at the Democrats and saying, we've been faithfully voting Democrat for decades now, and we don't feel like we're as far along as we ought to be as a community. It's really time for you to step up. Is that an attitude that you're seeing toward the Democrats right now, even though people continue to vote Democratic?
Yeah, and again, the black vote is not a monolith. It's very diverse within that vote. But I think without question, there's a feeling that Democrats are taking blacks for granted. The problem is that when you have someone like Trump in the black community, many perceive him to be a white nationalist. So even though they may want to broker their leverage in their vote, they don't want to attach it to a person like Trump. So I think there's been dissatisfaction and a feeling of disdain, but they don't see the alternative as being a whole lot better, and that's been the conundrum.
Did it resonate with the black community? And perhaps this is an obvious answer, but how much did it resonate with the black community that Joseph Biden picked a black woman as his running mate?
Well, again, you can't speak for the entire community. There are folks who were obviously very enthused by that. There are folks who also thought that she didn't bring much to the table as a strategic candidate. If you want to get a black woman, Val Demings in Florida was a former police chief, black woman. She's in Florida. From a strategic standpoint, someone would argue that Val Demings may be a better play than Kamala Harris. So I think there are people who were heartened that he chose and stayed true to his word on a black woman. I don't know if in the black community that Kamala Harris is widely received, truth be told. She is with the black women and with the sororities, but there are many blacks who I've talked to who are ambivalent, think she's qualified, but not necessarily overblown by her or by Biden, by that matter. A lot of folks who feel this Biden-Kamala ticket is just okay, but it beats the alternative of Trump, and that's why this race is so very, interesting.
So let's talk about local politics here for a moment, Stan, because as I said, you've been watching politics in this state for a good many decades, and so right now we have Joe Arasimowicz, Themis Claridis, and Lynn Fasano, all three saying they're not going to run again. They're bailing out. There are other things they like to go do. What do you think this portends for the Connecticut legislature going forward?
Well, first of all, Arasimowicz has a great nickname, A to Z.
Yeah.
For folks who don't know, they call him that. That's kind of an inside joke. But anyways, he's a great football coach in the area. His time has come. I think the person to watch, Brent, is a guy named Matt Ritter. I think you will see him ascend to be the House Speaker. He's now the Majority Leader. He's the son of Tom Ritter, a very, very popular guy in Hartford. I think that's the story after election. Is if the Democrats, they're calling Connecticut, Matt Ritter's star will continue to rise. I think you'll hear a lot about him, both in his role as House Speaker and then looking forward at John Larson. John Larson, I think, is 72 years old, several terms, and looking ahead that Matt Ritter is someone who could look at that Larson seat, or if he's inclined to look at governor. He's an extremely popular guy and a rising star.
You know, we had Lynn Fasano and Joe Arasimowicz on together with us a little earlier, both of them talking about the great relationship that they've shared and the way that they've been able to work together. And of course, you take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because it is politics, and when budget time rolls around every year, the gloves kind of come off. But things have been very civil in Hartford. How does that continue, do you think, regardless of who gets elected tonight?
Yeah, if the Democrats continue to serve here, and Matt Ritter is your House Speaker, Matt's a very collaborative guy. Again, the son of Tom Ritter. Tom was a very collaborative guy. Tom was the first three-term House Speaker. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was covering the legislature, I covered Tom Ritter's first term as House Speaker. And at that time, there was a working agreement that the House Speaker only serves 2 terms. Tom Ritter had the unprecedented situation where he served 3 terms, the first person to do that. And Tom Ritter was working on his 3rd term in his first term. He was already planting seeds. So that told me how forward-thinking he was. But I think the Ritter family is very collaborative. I think that spirit will continue. So I don't see any reason why it would not. And then the reality is, being Democrats are going to control both the House and the Senate. So even if Republicans don't want to collaborate, the numbers aren't there for them. So they need to come to the table and at least be cohesive.
All right. All right. Stan Simpson, always a pleasure. Don't be a stranger. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, stay with us. Now, look, we have another Fox News cut-in coming up in just a little bit. That means we're going to go on television for just a couple of minutes here. We're not going anywhere. Stick around. You can watch it from sort of behind the scenes, but we will keep the conversation going. So when is that coming up here, Scott? Got about a minute. Let's pick up some, let's take some live pictures of the Capitol and talk for just a second about polls closing. You know, it's interesting. So we closed our polls here at 8 p.m. It turns out that the polls in Indiana and Kentucky had already closed 6 p.m. our time, and polls will be closing across the country from 7. All right, thanks for being with us on this election night 2020. I'm Brent Harden. The polls have been closed in Connecticut for about 90 minutes now, and the Associated Press is continuing to call races, and that includes the one here in Connecticut. The AP confirming that Joe Biden has won Connecticut and its 7 electoral votes. That race called shortly after the polls closed at 8 p.m. here. Let's check in now with Fox 61's Matt Caron. He's been following voter turnout and the race for Connecticut's 5th congressional district tonight. Matt?
Yeah, Brent, it is a night of multitasking. You can see I have 2 different cell phones here because I'm constantly refreshing the live election results that we have posted on Fox61.com. And I have to tell you, I've been closely monitoring this race here in the 5th congressional district between the Democrat incumbent Jahana Hayes and the Republican challenger David Sullivan. And this is got to be, where things stand right now, the minor surprise of the night. Now, keep in mind, it's still very early. I mean, very, very early. Just 6% of the precincts reporting. That's 9 out of 154. But as it stands right now, Republican David Sullivan has 50% of the vote to Jahana Hayes with 49% of the vote. And then Bruce Walczak, the independent, you never thought 1% could make a difference, but if that 1% went to Jahana Hayes, they'd be tied right now. I mean, they still are essentially tied. This is a very, very close race and one that is worth watching. And the reason that I say that this is such a surprise is because Jahana Hayes is the Democratic incumbent. She had the backing of the establishment within her party, and she raised really a lot more money than David Sullivan. I mean, they both had money, but Jahana raised $1.3 million to fund her campaign, and David Sullivan only had about $370,000. So the thing that David Sullivan has going for him here is he's been to all 41 communities here in the 5th congressional district. He's really been hitting those communities very hard, going door to door, and he's actually accused Representative Jahana Hayes of being sort of absentee and not really being visible within the communities here in the 5th district, something, of course, that she has vehemently denied. Now, remember, too, that if this race stays as close as it is right now, you got to think about Jahana Hayes. She had COVID. She came down with COVID. So she was essentially quarantined for 14 days. That's 14 days that she could have spent campaigning, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, meeting voters. But she was inside of a room recovering from COVID. So you have to think about all of these things. But right now, guys, the minor surprise of the night here in the 5th Congressional District with David Sullivan running just barely ahead of Jahana Hayes right now, the Democratic incumbent. We're going to keep a very close eye on this one. We're live in Cheshire. Matt Caron, Fox 61 News.
And we are, of course, watching closely with our big board in our election night coverage here, starting with some of these local races. Matt just went over the congressional 5th district for you, where he mentioned this is looking like a tight race. So I'm going to move on here with some of the other ones we are watching tonight. The 1st congressional district, right now, again, these results are very early in the night right now, but it's showing that John Larson is leading right now with 67%. I want to move on here to the 3rd congressional district, where Rosa DeLauro is leading there as well. So again, we are keeping our eye on these local races as well as the national races going on right now. So of course, we'll update you as soon as more results start to come in. Brent, back to you.
Aisha, thanks. And you can always get the latest information on the election on fox61.com and on the Fox 61 News app. And stay with us streaming live here on Facebook, YouTube, and the Fox 61 News app right now for continuing coverage. All right, we're bringing in now to talk. All right, here we are. Joining us now to talk more about the election and what viewers at home are experiencing during this unprecedented time is Jan Evangelo Nasser, an associate faculty member for Communication and Media Studies program at Post University. And thanks for taking the time to join us tonight. And so, yeah, let's just dive in right there. And let me just ask the question the way I just read it. What might people be experiencing? Because, listen, this is a one-of-a-kind election tonight.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much, Brent. Thank you for having me over. These are definitely interesting times, and I'm sure, like, everyone's on their nerves watching right now as, we go through this election process. At Post University, we really pride ourselves to be a forward-thinking, progressive, conversational university, where it's not just a unidirectional academic approach. We really advocate and support our students to think critically and analytically about the news around them, and not just be influenced by what they see and that's it. We really engage them to have conversations, to look at different outlets, different news coming from different places, whether it's on radio, on broadcast, or through social media such as Facebook and Twitter. And it's very interesting because, the two candidates have different approaches and strategies in their political campaigns. Now, I come from a very neutral and unbiased perspective here in this setting. As an advertising professional myself, I would say, these political advertising campaigns are somehow, a comparison to, brands and services that are advertised nowadays, like, for example, McDonald's and Burger King. Like, you see a lot of competitive advertising that they do with each other, like, I'm better, no, I'm better, and they're trying to persuade their audiences to come to them. And if you look at the political campaigns between the two candidates, it's like, we want to sway you to vote for us, so come for me, don't go for him or her. So that really influences, viewers to think in a certain way, but they should not just, stand there and take that information and that's it. They should look at different outlets, different news anchors, different information coming from everywhere. But I think the situation here is the idea of the gatekeepers who are behind these news. Gatekeepers filter and refine information the way they want, depending on different networks and depending on different sources. We just heard, of Facebook and Twitter being accused of, hiding harmful information and not allowing anyone to comment in the speech bubbles or to react. And that created a buzz. People didn't take it so well. Other people took it well. So if you think about it, well, Facebook and Twitter should be objective, outlets, and they should just let information go. And of course there shouldn't be any harm, but is it really considered harm? Some people may ask. And that kind of, brings us back to the purpose of like journalism. Journalism, the main purpose of journalism is state facts, be honest, say the truth, say it as it is. Now, back in the day, it was much easier because, the truth can be told as it is. But nowadays, when you have so much technology and content and new platforms such as like TikTok, or Instagram, content can be filtered, content can be modified, influenced in a way that they would create this content to persuade in the way that they want. So, which is why we really encourage everyone, our students at Post and everyone around, to think critically, analyze, take everything in, take all the information you can, do your own study, research, generate conversations with one another, and make a decision, and go about it that way. And when we talk about, how news outlets like filter the results or like filter news and like how they publish premature results, we think about it this way, like, is it accurate? I mean, is it coming now? Will it change tomorrow? Like right now they're saying, this candidate won this state, but will that still be accurate tomorrow? And what platform is saying that? If you take, for example, TikTok wasn't apparent back in 2016 during the elections. It wasn't there, but now it's here. Are people utilizing that to generate like results or news or conclusions? And how will that, generate in the future? From my perspective, as a media scholar, I would say just watch and see and analyze, because the algorithms of social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok will always change, and there will always be filtering and gatekeepers, and news have become subjective. So just analyze, look, evaluate, study, and generate conversations.
Yeah, and actually no easy task, and good advice for everyone, whatever their age, certainly in this age of social media. You have to evaluate the information you're being given. Jad Evangelo Nasser of Post University, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank
we
you so
appreciate
much.
your time.
Of course.
All right, earlier this evening, our Jen Bernstein and Ben Goldman had a conversation with Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont on what to expect on this election night. Here's what the governor had to say.
We're going to talk about our local races here in Connecticut, but first I want to talk about the presidential race and what's at stake here. Your administration has had to work with the Trump administration on a number of things, including the pandemic that we've been dealing with here. What do you think is at stake in this election moving forward?
Oh, I think the character of the nation. Look, often at this stage of a campaign, maybe the two candidates start to blur. But in this case, there's a stark difference between what Donald Trump's America looks like and what it could be under Joe Biden. And I think that's why, Jen, you have one of the largest turnouts in the history of the state. I think you're going to find that across the country as well. I was just looking at the numbers, interested to see that Plainfield has over 95% of the people have already voted. Less than 100 can turn out and get to 100%. Who knows?
Governor, a lot of leadership changes in the Republican Party here in the state of Connecticut, with Themis Claridis leaving, Len Fasano. What type of legislature do you expect to be working with? What kind of outcome do you think is going to happen here when it comes to these local state races tonight?
I think it'll be a referendum on the job we've done over the last couple of years here in this state. When it comes to balancing the budget, when it comes to dealing with COVID and other big issues that have confronted us. But look, I want people in the legislature who are ready to solve problems and not create issues, not just try and get a political issue. And I'm looking forward to some of the new leadership that's going to be there.
The police accountability bill that you signed into law has had repercussions on a lot of these races. A lot of the police unions backing the Republican candidate, considering the police accountability bill was largely along Democratic Party lines here. Any regrets on that bill?
Look, I think it's important that people be held accountable, and the police accountability bill is one way to do that. But it also demonstrates real respect for our police. And I got to tell you, we just swore in a class of state police. We had more applicants to that class, thousands than we've ever had before. We had our most diverse class in terms of women and people of color. And I'm doing everything I can to be a champion for the state police and the amazing work they're doing around the state.
Governor, you've run for office so many times. You finally get elected, and for the past 8 or 9 months that you've been governor of this state, you've been dealing with this crisis, this pandemic. the last thing that you expected to probably deal with when you were campaigning and hoping to lead this state. But now that we're 8 or 9 months in the weeds of it, and, a lot of people are watching us who might be laid off, might be looking for some type of answer. We see all of this turnout of people unifying in our state, and whoever they're voting for, there's some type of unification amid this pandemic. What's your message to them? It's got to be somewhat encouraging for you, the leader of a state with now almost 80% of people voting. There's got to be some message of unification, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Look, we got hit by this pandemic. Connecticut really rallied, got together as one. We're in this together. People wearing the mask. That's how we brought our infection rate down to some of the lowest in the country for a long time. I hate to say it, but it is ticking up in this state as well as it is around the country. But despite that cloud that could be hanging over, people went out and voted. Thankfully, we had the absentee ballots, so those who are older at risk could vote without having to line up at the ballot box. And I think people are doing it safely. I think people are keeping the distance. And if you can vote safely. I think that's a good day.
I want to make sure we get this in. We were looking on Joe Biden's website, and we see that you, as well as the First Lady here in Connecticut, Annie Lamont, have helped him raise over $100,000 in contributions. You've always been a Joe Biden fan. Have you talked to his camp today? And what do you plan if he does become president? Are you going to get pulled up?
Look, I am a Joe Biden fan, have been for some time. He fights for the middle class. I think he represents our best values. I think people know him. Obviously, he's got a lot of friends here in Connecticut. A lot of people turned out for him. A lot of people raised money. And I think he's going to be a good friend for Connecticut as well as we wade our way through what I hope is the final innings of this pandemic and get our state back on its feet with support to get people back at work.
Governor, I was going to push you on health insurance tonight, but we ran out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on this election night. We always appreciate it.
Thank you, Governor.
Ben, Jen, thank you, guys.
All right, let's check in one more time with Aisha Bowe with a race alert, tackling everything from the local contests all the way up to the race for the White House. Aisha.
Brent, good evening to you. Of course, we are using our big board here tonight to have you covered on this election night. And I want to start with those local races. All 5 congressional seats, of course, up for re-election, starting with the 1st congressional district where John Larson is hoping to get re-elected. Right now, he is leading with 68% of the votes counted so far. But again, as we have been talking about all night with you, it is still pretty early to get a picture of what's going to happen there. Congressional district, the 2nd one here, where Joe Courtney is also running for re-election, the Democratic candidate against Justin Anderson. Again, he is leading in that area there. Another race to look at this evening, Rosa DeLauro, who is defending her seat there, so far leading 60%. She's running against Margaret Streicker there. Another race to watch tonight, the congressional district, the 5th congressional district. We have seen this number fluctuate back and forth between incumbent Jahana Hayes and her contender David X. Sullivan. And right now it looks like David X. Sullivan is leading with 51%. So definitely a race that we want to keep our eye on tonight. So from that, I want to move on with some of these national races that we are talking about here. Of course, as we reported earlier this evening, Joe Biden has won Connecticut. He is projected to be the winner, I should say. I want to give you a look at the map here at what things are looking like nationally. So these are the projected results so far. A lot of colors going on here, and we have a lot of key states to keep an eye on throughout the night. Right now, so far, there haven't been much surprises. A lot of the states that are being called right now, Trump had one in 2016, and then former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, she had one back in 2016. So far, no surprises. But of course, we are keeping our eye on some of those battleground states, including Georgia, where there are 16 electoral college votes there. And then North Carolina as well. We are watching right now that showing purple. Ohio, also another state to watch tonight. Last but not least, we are also Keeping an eye on the Senate balance of power. As we know, Republicans right now do hold the majority with 53 seats. Democrats will need to flip at least 3 seats to gain control there. And so far, this is what the results are looking like. 42-38. Of course, these are very early results as more polls results are coming in and a lot more votes are being counted tonight. As we have been reiterating for you all week long, we will be keeping an eye on some of those early results for you, but keep in mind that things are still trickling in. So, of course, we'll keep you updated as soon as we get more results here from our big board. But for now, back to you, Brent.
Aisha, thank you. Okay, it's one of the most talked about and highly debated concepts in our American democracy right now. And with all eyes on that magic number of 270 electoral votes, let's take a closer look now at the system itself. Jen Bernstein breaks down the Electoral College.
Here in the U.S., we don't directly vote for our president. If we did, Hillary Clinton would be in the White House now, and Al Gore would have won in 2000. Both won the popular vote. Instead, we elect our president through the Electoral College. So when you cast your ballot for Trump or Biden, you're technically voting for a group of people who cast each state's official vote for president. They're called electors. There are 538 electors in all. Each state has a set number based on how many seats they have in Congress. 270 is the magic number needed to win the White House.
CBS projects that Senator Barack Obama of Illinois will be the next president.
Typically, news organizations are able to call the winner on election night. This year, that's November 3rd. But it might take a little longer this year because of the large increase in the number of mail-in ballots. Those take longer to process and count than in-person votes. Here's how the process works. Each town or city will count its votes, and election officials will then certify each of the towns and cities' results. The governor of each state then certifying the statewide numbers. States have until December 8th to certify their results because 6 days later, on December 14th, electors meet in every state to formally cast their votes for president and vice president. States then send the certificate of their votes to the nation's capital. On January 6th, the sitting VP, in this case Mike Pence, acting as the Senate president, presides over a joint session of Congress to read aloud the Electoral College results. Barring any objections from Congress, Pence officially certifies the vote. And 2 weeks later, on January 20th, whoever won the vote is sworn in as president and vice president by Chief Justice John Roberts. It's a long, elaborate process, and this year experts believe it could face many legal challenges along the way.
All right, thank you, Jen. We want to bring John Dankosky back in to continue our conversation in our final minutes here on this special coverage. And John, thank you for sticking around. We appreciate it. I want to ask you first about young voters, and people have observed that young voters look at this election differently. Guy my age might look at candidates and say, who's gonna keep a lid on taxes? You know, who's gonna do better at growing jobs? Who's gonna be a better president? You know, a younger voter is more likely to look and say, we have to get this person elected or climate change is going to render the planet uninhabitable in 20 years, and that's my future. They see a direct effect on their personal future in this election. Is that what you found talking to them?
It's certainly what I've found, and I think that it's clear that a lot of younger voters are very energized this time around. They're energized in part by everything you just said, Brent. Look, at the end of the day, climate change is this overwhelming crisis that is looming for everyone who's on this planet right now, but especially for people who plan to be here for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And the fact is that young voters believe overwhelmingly that climate change is the #1 issue that they need to come out and vote for. But here's the thing. In this last year, we've seen all these wildfires, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen all sorts of signs of climate change really coming home and hitting people where they live in a way that maybe they've never, had before. At the same time, there's been this giant racial reckoning in America, and this is another thing that is galvanizing so many young voters. people who grew up in this generation have essentially said, we need to do something about the systemic racism that we see across America. And that's something we hear from young voters, not just in Connecticut, but everywhere that I've talked to them. And so those two issues, very different than the pocketbook issues you're talking about, very different than the pocketbook issues that, frankly, 70-year-old politicians go out and stump about.
Yeah. So talking about older voters, though, there is this perception out there across the country. People lament that the Republican Party seems to be drifting farther and farther to the right all the time, and that the Democratic Party seems to be drifting farther and farther to the left all the time, and that the moderates on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, are left a little disenfranchised and don't really know quite what to do about that. Here in Connecticut, we have a very large population, I guess you would say, of registered independents. So do you think that sentiment is as strong here in Connecticut as it might be in some other places?
I think one of the reasons that you see this huge number of unaffiliated voters, and as I was talking about earlier in our program, close to 1 million voters in the state are unaffiliated. They're not Republicans, they're not Democrats, and it's not because they don't want to choose one or the other. It's because they believe that there's something that's in the middle. And I think that in the last several cycles, many of the candidates at the presidential level and at the local level even aren't necessarily speaking directly to the concerns of people who are there right in the middle. It's why I think both parties don't need to necessarily move from one edge to the other to the middle. They just have to find real common ground. They have to figure out ways in issues like climate change that are going to affect everyone. But Brent, I'll just tell you very quickly, the Yale Center for Climate Research, they do great work on this. They poll people around the country about issues like climate change. There's still a real divide amongst people who think that climate change is actually going to be a big issue for them. That's one of those things that I think if more politicians actually started talking about, we could start to see a little bit more action. They would actually be able to connect on such an important issue, but there's just not enough conversation about it, I think, to actually energize voters and say, this is a centrist issue right here.
Yeah. All right, John Dankosky of the Connecticut Mirror, host of the, oh gosh, now I've spaced your...
It's called Steady Habits. It's the land of steady habits, Brent. This is important.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Listen, I appreciate you joining us.
Of course.
Very interesting stuff. Thanks for being here. And that's going to do it for us tonight for a special digital coverage on this election night. But you can expect more in just a moment live on Fox 61 on the news at 10 and then the news at 11. Our crews are bringing you the very latest on the races all around the state, and we'll have the newest information on everything happening in the race for the White House. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks.